Recently, Gygax released a beta for the fractured stuff of Armadillo, allowing us to try out the changes that were proposed in the live game. This meant we could get a feel for the staff and provide some feedback on its power. This rebalance came with quite a few changes, the first of which is the removal of recursive autos. This means that when your ability crits and the FSOA spec fires out an extra hit, that extra hit can no longer produce any more hits. It can hit once and then it's done. This means that abilities that generally relied on lots of autos for their damage, such as Armadillo Battle Staff or Smoke Tendrils, are no longer as strong as they were before. This doesn't mean they are bad. Smoke Tendrils is still very good, and ABS, although less commonly used, still has its place. But this does mean that they won't provide the same damage or burst that they used to. Secondly, the hits fired from the fractured staff of Armadillo have been changed from auto attacks to ability damage. This means that Gygax can tweak the damage of these hits to a number they see fit, which currently is considerably lower than that of an auto attack. The main benefit from that is that you can now 4-tick auto attack within your FSOA spec. This is really powerful, as trading that 1 tick for an auto that can also crit and give an extra hit is great damage per tick and will definitely be used in most rotations. A side effect of this is that the Sanguinate buff now affects the FSOA damage for a nice little DPS boost. This also means that because the damage from the FSOA is ability damage, not auto attack damage, you are able to have dual wield or a 2-hander on and you'll deal the same damage. This means that weapon switching between dual wield and 2H is a lot more viable, as is camping dual wield and only switching to the FSOA for the spec. This means that Greater Conk is now the backbone of rotations, and Channeler's Ring may start to become the meta. Sadly though, this does mean that you can no longer benefit as much from spell effects, such as the healing from Blood Barrage, the extra adrenaline from AoE spells, and the easy Ruby Aurora stack gain. Overall, when initially announced, these changes seemed like a pretty big nerf, and most of the community were pretty frustrated. Now that the beta is live, we can test these changes in-game and try the rebalance out for ourselves. Surprisingly, the overall damage for Sunshine is very similar to current. A few weeks ago, I did 50 Raksha kills, and over those 50, my average time was 2 minutes 15 seconds. 1. The fastest was 142, which was a pull skip, and the fastest non-pull skip was a 154. But because of the massive variance that FSOA currently has, my slowest time was a 246.8. Comparing this to the beta, my average time over the 50 Raksha kills was 2 minutes 15 seconds. 8. Very similar. My fastest kill was a 2 minutes 4 seconds, my slowest was 2:27, showing that the beta FSOA is a lot more consistent and rotations will be a lot closer to average. This does mean you're less likely to have bad kills where you deal a lot less damage than expected, but this also means you're less likely to have a good kill where you pop off and crit everything. To compare the burst, I went to challenge Medhelwa, a boss that has 300k life points. I did an hour in the beta and the live game, using the same setup for both. In the live game, it took me 10 minutes into the hour to get a 16.2 second kill. Over the next 20 minutes, I got that time down by getting a 15 second twice before getting a 13.8. The second half of the hour was spent trying to improve on this time, and although I did get a few 15 second kills, that 13.8 remained my fastest. Now moving on to the beta. Figuring out a good burst rotation was a lot harder, because even with great RNG, none of your abilities deal as much damage. After around 30 minutes, my best kill was a 23.8, and even then it was fairly difficult to come close to it. My best time over the full hour ended up being a 19.8. I achieved a couple low 20-second kills, but other than that, I was quite far off that time. Massive 6 seconds difference in such a short fight. It's very obvious that with the change to recursive autos and lowering the FSOA damage, burst damage with this weapon is going to suffer quite drastically, and kills such as this Terraket won't be possible anymore. Raksha and Challenge Medhelwa were the only two bosses I tested, but I chose these because they're essentially just DPS dummies. Your kill times rely purely on your damage. There's no mechanics and not really any different phases. It's all just DPS. So although you might think, oh, I don't do Raksha, these findings will definitely be relevant in other scenarios. It shows that your average damage in most boss fights will be fairly similar, with a lot less variance than before. But it also does show that if you're hoping for burst in a certain portion of a fight, you're definitely going to be lacking. I tried this out with my hybrid Raksha rotation. Phase 1 is completed with melee, then phase 2 and 3 are an FSOA Sun, allowing you to quite consistently pull skip. In the main game, it's very common to pull skip and achieve quite fast times. In a sample of 50 kills, my average time was 1 minute 55.9, with 62% of these kills being a pull skip. But in the beta, pull skips were rare. The lack of burst from the FSOA meant that in the hour I only achieved 4 pull skips, and my fastest time was a 149, quite a bit off what I'd expect in the live game. In any scenario where you're needing your Sun to do an amount of damage that might be slightly RNG, it's definitely lacking. Overall, this is definitely a rebalance and not a nerf. For high-end players, the average damage was around the same, with speed scenarios and burst damage falling off quite heavily. For more casual players, this is definitely a buff. The FSOA hits not being tied to your main hand now means you can camp dual almost your entire sun, allowing for more damage and less effort than before. If you are looking to put in more effort, then the allowance of 40 now provides quite a large damage increase, and ABS, although it is still useful, is definitely not the backbone of rotations. If I were to change anything, I wish that recursive autos were brought back in a nerfed form so that you can still have those rare good RNG kills. And I think most people will miss the spell effects that were so useful with the FSOA. As always, a lot of questions such as what spec should I use, what ring should I use, will all be answered by some math man in due course. But for now, we can all enjoy the massive DPS that the FSOA still outputs.